Okay, I think we are live again. So let me see if the comments will come up this time. Okay, I think we are live again. So let me see if the comments will come up this time. Okay, so we are definitely live, right? So let me see if the comments will come up, but if it doesn't, we may have to do this session without the comments. We are live again. Okay, yeah. So I'm seeing the live comments here. Okay, so even as the students come back in, just say hello. Say hello. So I'll be able to interact with you all. So say hello. So I'll be able to interact with you all. I'm going to give more persons some time to come on to the live and we will get this thing going. So for those that are new, hi everyone, I'm Miss Guy and I'm really happy to have the opportunity to share with you today. We know that you are in exam prep mode, and this is Scholars Immaculate Academy, and we want to help you prepare for your examination, right? So if you're currently coming in, say hello, say hello, say hello, so we can um, say hello to you, right? Ensure you have your textbooks, your study guides, because it is a study session, right? So you are free to interact and share with us, right? Because we went down, I'm still trying to get some more persons back in, but I hope that this day's session will be informative to you and that you will be able to benefit from this session. So I'm just trying to send out the information one more time. So in 2 minutes time, we're going to begin our revision session. When you get in, remember to share it with somebody who you know that is currently doing the examination, right? Let somebody know that we are live and we are ready to go, even as we prepare for your examination. You know, when I was doing exams, I wish I had persons, you know, there to support me on this journey, but we didn't have this kind of an outlet. So take advantage of it. All right. So take advantage of it this evening, even as we go forward. Take advantage of this session. Okay. All right. So I'm just trying to get some students back into the room. Right. And then we're going to begin. So welcome, 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 welcome to our study session today. And I hope that it is indeed informative and that's something that we discussed today going to be an exam, right? And that's the hope that we have. All right. So share the link with a friend. Even as you come in this evening, share the link with a friend and we will get right into this session for today. Say hello. Say hello when you come in. Say hello when you come in so that I can officially welcome you. And we're going to begin. All right. So biology has 3 sections, as we know. So far we did section 1 review. We did section section C review. And today we are in section A review. All right. So I'm going to be studying with you all from the CXC study guide. It's an easy guide for you to go through. So that's what we're going to use today for our study. All right, we're going to be using the CXC study guide. So if you have one of those, you can use it. I recommend to my students all the time to ensure that they are using their study guides while studying. right? It's quite essential that you utilize these study guides because they were written based on the CXC syllabus. So it gives you a great opportunity to know how to study and how to approach your studies. So I recommend to students at this stage of the examination preparation to ensure that they are using, at least reading at least a chapter of the study guide a day coming up to your examination. It's a simple way to review for your exam. All right. So this is the CXC study guide. If you need a study guide, just let me know by leaving a comment and your email address, and I will send it to you via email. Right. So I know some students are still trying to locate our video for today. So I really want to wait for them, but we need to begin. All right. So welcome to our study session for today. As I said, we will be using the study guide to go through section A of the syllabus. Feel free to ask questions as we go, right? So remember, biology has 3 sections, A, B, and C. We already did C. All right, and section A is not a very long section, but once you master it, you'll be fine for the examination. So section A is for living organisms in the environment. So living organisms in the environment, all right? So that's what this section is about. And we're going to talk about things such as sampling, ecology, food chains, and food webs. All right, we're going to be looking at the living things and how they interact with each other. We're going to look at relationships. All right, so that's the main gist of our section. We're going to also look at the impacts of humans on the environment. We're going to talk about pollution and climate change. Now, guys, CXC loves to bring things that kind of surrounds the area of what is happening currently. So I want you all to pay attention to climate change and conservation for this exam. Look into things like recycling and those things. I'm not telling you that it's an exam, but CXC loves to bring current things. So during the pandemic, they ensure to bring questions on vaccines and on viruses and all of those things. So they tend to bring current stuff. So don't neglect those things. All right. So we're gonna get into the study. All right. So this is the study guide, as I said before, and it's quite essential to read through as you prepare for your examination. All right. So it's not a very long section, so we won't be here long today. But I hope that you're going to join the discussion. All right. So say hello to me as you come in, so I'll know who is with me this evening. So say hello in the comments, so I'll know who is with me today. All right. Say hello. Right? And I'll know who is with us today. All right, so okay, let's discuss. So we are looking at something called biodiversity. And I should have shown you the syllabus objectives before I got into the study guide. So let's go through the syllabus objectives before. All right, so let me just open my syllabus objectives and we're going to go through that before we get into the study for today. All right, so let me just bring up the study guide. I'm going to go through the study, the syllabus outline before we go through. Okay, we're going to go through the syllabus outline and then we're going to go through the study guide. All right, good. So I'm now opening it. So you should see it coming to your screen soon. Okay, hi Janaya. Hi Renelle. Welcome. And ensure to share with persons that you know that will need the session today. right? So this is our syllabus outline. When you study, guys, for any of your CXC subjects, ensure to use your syllabus, right? Your syllabus helps you to know how to study for a particular topic. So if you see an objective on the syllabus that you don't know, then it's a good place to get to learning it while you are revising for your exam. All right, so this is section A. As I said before, section A is called living organisms in the environment. All right. Hi, Amelia. Living organisms in the environment. So ensure that you go through those topics. All right. So let's go. So section A is the introductory section for the rest of the syllabus. All right. So what you have to know and be aware of is the concept of biodiversity and the similarities of living organisms. You have to understand the importance of the abiotic environment to living organisms. You have to understand that there's an interdependency between living organisms and their environment. You have to understand that there's a flow of energy that happens in our ecosystems. So I'm going to give you all some key terms to write down for me just now, so be ready to write of some definitions I want you all to learn for this section of the syllabus, right? You have to be able to talk about recycling and those lovely things, reducing and those things, and how we could help to maintain these waste products in our environment. And we have to look at the human impact, or the impact of our human activities on the environment. All right, so let's go through. Right, so the first objective, you have to learn how to group organisms into different sections and different categories based on similarities and differences, right? So you have to learn your different groupings. So you have to learn, for example, what is the characteristics of an insect? 6 legs, segmented bodies, have antennae, have wings, right? You have to learn how to differentiate organisms into subsets and groupings. So we're going to talk about those things today. And then you have to also be able to put organisms into groupings called taxas, right? So you're going to talk about taxonomy. I'm not sure if you remember those things. If you remember something from section A, say yes in the comments. If no, say miss no. So you have to be able to put organisms into categories. And remember, we have 5 kingdoms. We have the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungus category, right? We have the prokaryotes, we have the protistas, and these are further divided into subphylums or subdivisions. And we have the animal kingdom, and we could go on and on and on, right? And you have to be able to construct tables to distinguish between these categories. All right, so that's the first set of things you have to do in the syllabus. So you have to learn about the fish, reptiles, insects, animals, birds. You should be able to talk about the basic traits that they possess. All right, we have to be able to carry out simple ecological studies using collecting equipment and sampling equipment and learning the methods of sampling. So that's a topic that you all have to revise, methods of sampling. So let me know in the comments, did you all use a quadrat when you all did ecological sampling? You all did that experiment with the quadrat where you had to throw it and find the amount of organisms and stuff like that. Let me know if you all did that. Right, so that was an experiment that you all most likely had to do, right? And if you did that experiment, you had some calculations to work out, right? So you have to learn sampling methods. You have to learn the equipment for sampling and how they are used, right? So I'm asking you all a question. Did you all do that experiment at school? Feel free to drop yes or no in the comments for me, right? And then you have to learn how to use the basic sampling equipment. So we're going to discuss that today. Then we go on to have some definitions. All right, so I want us to define some terms. So let's start to take the list down. So the terms you need to know definitions for. What is a biotic factor? So biotic factor, abiotic factor. So if you're writing, those are definitions that you need to know. What is the niche of an organism? Right? You have to know the definition for niche. So can somebody volunteer? Amelia, can I ask you to write, or anybody, can you volunteer to write the words in the comments for me? Who's going to volunteer to write for me? Say yes, I will know who's writing for me in the comments. Okay, thank you, Amelia. All right, so these are some words you need to find the definitions for. Biotic factor, abiotic factor. So biotic factor, make sure you know the definition for biotic factor, abiotic factor. All right. The niche, so Niche, niche, habitat, ecology, so habitat. What is ecology? All right, what is ecology? Ecosystem. Okay, population and community. Population and community. Right? Population and community. So that these are some definitions you will have to note. Right? Population and community. So that's the other two. Right? Species. Species. What is a species? And there are specific definitions that CXC gave. She can't just tell them a species is an organism. That is not a species, right? So a species is a group of individuals, right, with common ancestry that are closely related to each other, resemble each other, and they have the ability to interbreed and produce a fertile offspring. So use your syllabus, right? So you could just Google biology CSEC syllabus and you'll find it, right? So population, species. The other one, Amelia, is community. All right, community. You have community already? Okay, good. Right, so that's the glossary list for now. Right, so for now, learn the definitions for those. They could ask you to differentiate. So they could say, what is the habitat? And what's the difference between the habitat and the niche? And you have to tell them the habitat is the place where the organism live, while the niche is the role or the responsibility the organism will have in the ecosystem. So you have to be able to differentiate. And when they say differentiate, remember you have to give the two sides of the argument. So we're just going through this section. I'm pulling up main definition words, and then we're going to go through section by section. All right. So those are some things you need to note, right? For that section of the syllabus in terms of ecology. All right, let's go up some more. Good. Let's make sure I'm not leaving out anything. All right. So for ecology, those are some things you need to know. Right? Also, you need to know what is competition. What is competition? Right? What is competition? What is competition? All right. Okay, good. Right. So you have to know what is competition. All right, let's continue. We're gonna talk about the abiotic factors and stuff like that. But for now, we're just going through for definitions. All right. So when you go on to talk about relationships, you need to know definitions for terms such as the producer, the consumer. So write down this list and write out a list of definitions, right, for these things, right? Because they could ask you for definitions, right? So producers, consumers. So what is the producer? What are the consumers, right? Okay. So this is in the section of food chain and food webs, right? Then you are asked the question as to what is a trophic level. So what is a trophic level? What is a trophic level? Right? So you should be able to construct a food chain. Can everybody here construct food chains and food webs? If you can, just say yes in the comments. Can you construct a basic food chain and food web? Say yes in the comments if you can. So only one person answered. All right. Okay. Not sure on the food webs. A little different. Okay. So we're gonna go through. Don't worry about it. All right. Let's continue to our key terms. Right. So we're gonna look at things like herbivores, carnivores, omnivores. So you have to be able to tell them what's a herbivore, carnivore, omnivore. So herbivore, carnivore, omnivore. So know those definitions and also know organisms that fall naturally into those positions. For example, if they ask you for examples of herbivores, you should be able to know that a rabbit eat grass, right? A sheep eats grass. So you should know natural herbivores, natural carnivores, natural omnivores. Humans are classed into the category of omnivores because we tend to eat plants and also we eat animals, right? And then carnivores are like lions, right? So ensure you know examples because they could tell you to write a food chain and include a herbivore, carnivore, and omnivore. And you should be able to tell them which one is the herbivore, which one is the carnivore, and which one is the omnivore. All right. And then you also have to be able to describe what is a predator and what is a prey. Right? So what is a predator? What is a prey? So you have to discuss the predator-prey relationship. So a predator is an animal that hunts other animals as a food source, while the prey is the animal that is being hunted. So you have to be able to differentiate the two, right? Like even from a food web, you should be able to pick out the predator and the prey along a food web or food chain. Okay? Right? You have to know how to construct food webs and food chains, okay? And put them into different trophic levels, right? Okay, Amelia, write this next word for me. You have to know the role of a decomposer. Anybody knows an example of a decomposer? What is a decomposer and what is it? And tell them what is the importance of having decomposers in our ecosystem and the role. So a decomposer is used in the ecosystem to break down and release nutrients, right? From dead and decaying material, right? So normally decomposers are fungi and also bacteria, right? So decomposers, have a definition of decomposers, know how they work, and know an example. For example, bread mold. Mold on bread, they are decomposing, right? And the importance of decomposers is that they are used in the production of biogas, right? So they produce biogases, right? You have to know your special bacteria is one. Yes, Amelia, bacteria is one, right? You have to note your special relationships. So you have to know your relationships such as mutualism, parasitism, commensalism, right? So you have to know your relationships. What is mutualism? What is commensalism? What is parasitism? Right? So you should be able to note those. All right? Okay? So note those and note examples as well. I've seen them ask examples before, and students don't know the examples. So parasitism, for example, a tick and a dog, right? It's an example of parasitism because the tick will feed on the dog and cause harm to the dog, while the tick benefits. So that's parasitism, right? And then you have commensalism, where one benefits, but the other one is doesn't benefit, or it isn't harmed, but it doesn't benefit, right? So an example of that is an epiphyte on a tree, right? An epiphyte on a tree. So the epiphyte is a type of plant that literally hangs on the top of a tree. Now the epiphyte is just resting on the tree. It is not sucking anything from the tree. It is not taking anything from the tree, right? The epiphyte is just living up there and that's it, right? So the epiphyte is just living up there and that's it. So that's basically it for the right? And so that's a commensalism, but mutualism is where both organisms benefit, right? So for example, if you all remember when you looked at the nitrogen cycle, you saw where in the bacteria, in the roots of nitrogen plants, we have something called root nodules, right? I hope you all did that before. And in those root nodules, it stores um basically bacteria lives there. How does the bacteria benefit? The bacteria gets a home in the root of the plant. Let me get my pen. Don't laugh, my joints. It is well known Miss Guy cannot draw. Right? So you have that root in the roots, there are something called root nodules, right? So in the root of the legumes, there's something called root nodules. In the root nodules, bacteria live basically, right? And as the bacteria live in the root nodules, they are able to have a home and shelter and food, right? They get food and supply from the plants. But in turn, the plant benefits because nitrogen is in the air in the form of nitrogen gas, but the plant just can't take in nitrogen from the air like through the leaf, like it will normally do for oxygen and carbon dioxide. So this nitrogen must be fixed into a way that is usable by the plant, right? So the bacteria in the roots actually helps to convert the nitrogen in the air, right, into a usable form, which is like nitrates and nitrites, right, in its roots. So the bacteria helps the plant to get nitrogen. So that's why we say that this is a beneficial relationship or a mutualistic relationship. But let me be real, some of us have friendships that is mutualistic, where both persons benefit. But then some of us have some friends that they alone benefiting from our lives. We're not benefiting nothing from them, you know? And then some of us have some friends that sucking on to us like mosquito. Anybody ever had a mosquito friend? Say yes in the comments. Right? So remember that it's like friends. What kind of friends you have? Do you have friends where both of you all are benefiting? That's called mutualistic. And then you have friends where only one person is benefiting, but the other one is not being harmed. That's called commensalism. And parasitism is when one sucks on one, right? And one doesn't survive and one does. Well, when I say survive, one is harmed. And yes, I have to say survive because sometimes parasites hold on to their hosts for a very long time until they eventually die, right? So it's a known fact, right? Right? So you have to know those definitions. You have to know those definitions. You also have to look at energy flow, right? In the food chain. So how does energy flow? It flows in one direction. All right, from the sun to the producer to the primary, secondary, tertiary consumers. It doesn't go in a cycle. It flows in one direction from the sun. All right. And then you have to know, as we discussed before, the role of decomposers, specifically in the carbon cycle. So you have to learn your carbon cycle, ensure you know your carbon cycle. All right. All right. So let's go down a little further. For those that are now coming in, we are just going through the general parts of the syllabus for this section. And the hopes is that you will realize areas that you need to do greater revision in. Right. To discuss the importance of and difficulties encountered in recycling manufactured materials, right? So you're talking about things like biodegradable and non-biodegradable. So those are two definitions that you need to have. Biodegradable and non-biodegradable. I think I owe Amelia a prize. She's been an excellent scribe for me today, right? So biodegradable and non-biodegradable material. So we have to know those definitions. What does biodegradable mean? What does non-biodegradable mean? So we have to know those, right? And you also have to know the impact on human activity on our energy. So what is happening right now with our energy in terms of oil and gas, right? How are we forming renewable sources of energy? So you have to learn your sources of energy. What is happening to our minerals that we dig, gold and all of these things? What is happening to those things, right? In terms of our forests, right? We have to learn definitions such as deforestation, deforestation, right? You have to know what is deforestation, what is afforestation. So what is deforestation? What is afforestation? So deforestation, afforestation, or afforestation, if you have to hear it that way to know how to spell it, right? So that means adding trees back to our ecosystem, right? We have to talk about over, we have to talk also about overpopulation. So what happens if our population become overpopulated? And we also have to talk about overfishing, right? And even over, hunting, as well. Over, hunting, as well. And even 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 over, hun Mm-hmm. All right. You have to note about pollution. So persons are writing this down in your book. So you have to know about pollution and how we add to pollution, for example, through agricultural practices. So when we use chemical fertilizers, right? How is that affecting us? Right? Products of industrialization. So when, for example, we have oil and gas and we burn the oil, we combust the oil to release energy, right? What is happening to our ecosystem as a result? So you have to note that, right? We have to talk about improper and proper garbage disposal. Right? And also we need to talk about what happens when we negatively pollute our environment, and also how we can lose habitat, species, and populations, right? So when we destroy habitats, how does that affect our species, right? And also how can pollution affect human health? I believe these are some of the last things. We have a little more to go, right? And you have to discuss, as you said before, how pollution affects us, not just the environment, but our health, right? Also the economy of small island states. So we have coral reefs, but like right now, when we have the rising temperature with climate change, how is that affecting our reefs right now? Right? So you have to discuss that. And one of the things we need to discuss, you see this section here is very important. See this climate change thing is very important, right? So you have to understand the concept of greenhouse gases, you know, how does the rise in global temperature, because we're experiencing the rise in global temperature right now, how does it affect us? How does it affect the sea level? We know when the ice will melt, right? We know when the ice melts, right? It causes a rise in the sea levels, right? We have to know also about ocean acidification. So acids formation in the ocean, and this could also be due to, like, for example, excess carbon dioxide in our atmosphere being dissolved in the ocean, which leads to the formation of carbonic acid and other acids, right? And we see acidification of our ocean is affecting our marine life, right? So pay attention to that and how it affects small island states, right? Because the rising sea levels, right, could cause islands that are under islands that are under sea level to go into extinction over the next couple of years is a possibility, right? Right, and you have to learn conservation methods. So how can we conserve our environment? How can our environment be restored? Right? So they love to ask you to give them strategies. So you talk about, using recycling and reducing and those methods, using natural methods for agriculture, talking about conservation methods. So how can we conserve, cut down less trees, right? Recycle paper, right? Use digital forms of news and reduce the use of newspapers and having to cut trees for paper, right? All of these things are methods and strategies. So learn about conservation methods, all right, and restoration methods, okay? And the last objective for section A is basically talking about factors that affect the growth and the survival of populations. So, for example, diseases, right? Um, when you have a lot of diseases, you realize that populations decrease, right? Invasive species. So, what is that invasive species? You all know what's that? Right? When we compete for space and food, this affects our population. Our population basically decreases, right? And they love to bring these type of questions like graph questions, right? And then we talk about natural disasters can also affect our population. So I'm giving you all the opportunity now. So thank you so much, Amelia. Right, we went through the entire section A in terms of the objectives. I want you all to tell me, where do you all want me to start? Right? Which area do you all think you have the most understanding thus far? Do you all think you have understanding in this last section? Um, do you think you have greater understanding? Do you all remember your sampling methods? Let me know. I want to hear from all persons on. Let me know which topics out of the ones that we just went through is most challenging for you, and we'll start there. So start from the beginning. Okay. So I know some students gonna come in now, because I know that students really couldn't have come on because of their Sabbath. So it's now 6. So they're gonna come in. Right? So all right, so start from the beginning. All right. Sampling methods. Okay. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go from the top. We're gonna go from the top. Right, we're gonna go from the top. Right, as I said, you all can have your textbooks. You all can have your textbooks to help you along. I'm gonna be mixing between the study guide. Um, I'm gonna be mixing between the study guide and also the syllabus. Right, I'm gonna be using the two aspects to be able to do today's session. Sorry. All right. So basically, organisms, we know that we are organisms, right? And we are so numerous in diversity when it comes to our life. So basically, we have so many different organisms that exist, right? Whether it be animals, plants, bacteria, and all of these things, right? And we must be able to put them into categories that are distinct, right? So basically, living organisms are grouped into sections based on observable similarities and differences. All right. So our similarities and differences tell us apart, right? So our visible characteristics would be, for example, hairiness, color, shape, in terms of leaves, venation, in terms of organisms, number of legs, wings, body segmentation, right? Also Also, other characteristics could tell us apart, right? So the presence of wings, the absence of wings, as we said before, the presence of antennae. So like having antennas and these things, you have to know the main things, right? Even with the fish, we would have seen in the past where they brought differentiation based on the diagrams that they had on the screen. So for example, the fish could have different types of fins, right? The fish can have something called, um, they can have a line along their belly region, or they don't have to have that. All right. So there are different differentiations you have to note, right? So in the exam, let me see if the past people that you have here have that question. They could give you a question where you have to differentiate into groups. So let me see if this sample paper that they normally have on the exam. Let me see if it has that. Right, so this is a sample paper that CXC had in the syllabus. Right, so we're gonna definitely do this question, but let me see if it have one of those sample questions that I'm talking about. Okay, so it doesn't have it. It doesn't have the question I'm talking about. All right, but I will find one and show it to you all. So there's a question that CXC loves to bring where they give you multiple organisms. Guys, you see this? The next thing I want to show you all, you see this syllabus? You see where they have these student reports? These are also good to go through when you're studying. They kind of give you all of the past papers for a certain amount of years, and basically they tell you how students would have done in the exam, the kind of answers they put, and what they were looking for. It helps you to know how to answer your questions as well. And this is also included in your syllabus. So go into your syllabus, it can help you, right? All right, but let me find it out. I'll find one of the questions. Let's just discuss and then I'll find the question to show it to you. So I'm showing you it because really and truly, they love to bring those types of questions. Right, let me get back to the objective. Right. So they love to bring those types of questions where they basically give you some insects, right? So they give you some insects. Let me look in the past paper booklet, right? But in the meantime, look at the syllabus. So they give you some insects and they basically ask you to tell them, they give you some organisms, it'll be insects and stuff, and they ask you to draw a table to show them the difference in the characteristics, right? They ask you sometimes to draw something called a dichotomous scheme. I'm going to show you questions like it. Let me just find it. All right, so give me a second. Let me just pull it up. All right, so give me a second. I'm putting it up. Guys, I'm still looking for the question, so don't leave. All right, so we have to come back to it because I'm not seeing one right now, but I'm pretty sure we're gonna cross one as we go into a question. All right, so we'll come back to it. Right? But the main thing I want you to just note is that they could ask you to put the organisms into categories based on the amount of legs. How many legs does an insect have? So you will see insects with a certain amount of legs. Then you will see those arachnoids, those spiders with some legs. How many legs does a spider have? You hear me? How much legs does an insect have? And how much legs does a spider have? So I'm waiting for the answer in the comments. Right? So you have to note, right? You have to be able to differentiate the amount of segments an organism have. So if you have an insect, right, you may see it having like a body like this, and you may see the antennae to the top. So you have to be able to differentiate if it has an antennae or not, how many legs, how many body segments. So like this one will have like two body segments or whatever. So you have to be able to differentiate the amount of body segments an organism will have, right? You have to know if it has, well, obviously if it's an insect, it will have the wings, right? But some insects have wings like the butterfly, right? Right? So you have to note those things. So they could ask you, and a spider has 8 legs. An insect has 6 legs, by the way, and a spider have 8 legs, and then the millipede and the centipede, they have a lot more. So I've seen questions where they have asked you to differentiate the organisms by a noticeable character. So then you'd have had in your table, you would have written number, you'd have written the organism, so you'd have written like number of legs, the number of legs in the table, right? Number of legs, and then you would have written um organisms. Sorry, I'm using the mouse to type, so sorry about that. Right? So organisms, and then you'd have written 6 legs would have been what, an insect, right? So they have given you the insects. Then 8 eggs would have been the spider, and more than 8, more than 8 would have been like your millipedes and your centipedes and those organisms that have more than 8 legs, right? So I'm just showing you how they can bring this type of a question. They can bring they could show you the organisms and ask you to put it into a table, right? So then it may also have some organisms that have wings or no wings. So for example, they had wings or no wings. You'd have right here, presence of wings, and then you can have right yes or no, you can have right present or absent, and you write the organisms that have it and the ones that don't. Let me know if you all are following me. So sometimes they could ask you like that. So they could ask you even like the fish, right? As I said, they could ask you the presence of the lateral line across the belly of the fish. So if you have a fish, right? Some of them have the behind the gill has a line along the belly, right? We call that line the lateral line, right? Some of them have it and some of them don't. And based on the type of fish, you'll see different types of fins along the fish, right? So you have to be able to look at the fish itself and be able to say it has no lateral line, it has a lateral line, and use that characteristic in order to answer the table or to fill in the table, right? So go through these again, right? Go through these segmentations again, right? And remember that organisms can be placed into categories, right? And it can be placed into a category which you know, kingdom. You all know the classification. So kingdom, the order of classification. So one of my high school teachers gave us an acronym, and the acronym was kindly. Please come over for good soup. I'm not sure if your teachers taught you that. So the K stands for kingdom. Your teachers taught you all those acronyms. The K stands for kingdom. The P stands for phylum. The C stands for class. The O stands for order. The F stands for family. The G stands for genus. And the S stands for species. You all learned that? Let me know if you all did. First time hearing it. Your teacher may have used a different maybe a different acronym in terms of how to remember it, but you all should have done the classification. Just note that the first classification branch is the kingdom, and the kingdom is broken down into something called the phylum, then class, then something called order, family, genus, and species, right? Kindly please come over for good soup. So kingdom, the K stands for kingdom, the P stands for phylum, the C stands for class, the O stands for order, the F stands for family. So the P stands for phylum, Phylum, phylum. Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and then we have species. So we have 5 known kingdoms that we discussed. We know the kingdom, the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungi kingdom, the prokaryotes, and the protista kingdom. So we know amoeba is a single cell organism. It is actually in the protista kingdom. Right? So we have 5 kingdoms we need to note. The plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, the fungi kingdom, prokaryotes, and the protista kingdom. All right. All right. So I hope I'm not boring anybody, but the aim is to let you understand. So I hope that we are following. Right? I know Amelia is writing, and remember your syllabus is online, so you have access to all of this information. Right? So we have the protist, the prokaryotes. We have the protista, which amoeba is a protista, right? Right? If you look at how humans are, or how we break it down, the animal kingdom is broken down into phylums, right? Because we say kindly, please. So some of the phylums would include the phylums that contains, um, we'll call one chordata, right? And then chordata is broken down into the class fish, reptiles, insects, and birds. So fish, reptile, insects, and birds, these are all classes, right? So I'm showing you how we're going from the kingdom, so the animal kingdom, right? The animal kingdom went into the phylum chordata. So kingdom and then phylum plus chordata, right? And this chordata kingdom phylum was broken down into, after phylum is class, right? So the different class under this chordata, right, would include the fish, reptiles, insects, birds, mammals, right? So you see where you're going down and down into becoming more specific, right? So that's how we get it into that branch. So this chordata can branch into the fish, class would be like fish, reptiles, which is like your snakes and stuff like that, and your lizards and stuff like that. And then you have your insects, you have your birds, and then you have us, right? Humans fall under the category of mammals. So when you're revising, I recommend that you kind of know what makes a fish, right? So a fish, some key features of each. So a fish, they can't breed outside of, or they can't live outside of the water, right? They have gills. They have, some of them have scale, right? Some doesn't. They have fins. Reptiles, they are cold-blooded, right? They change their skin, right? So consider reptiles. Then we have insects. We have birds. So birds have feathers, right? Key features, learn the key features, okay? And then we have mammals, we are mammals, we are milk-producing organisms, right? Consider, like, for example, reptiles tend to lay eggs, Fish lay eggs. Humans, we produce live offsprings. Some birds, some fishes produce live fishes as well, right? Right? Some produces like live fishes as well. All right, so right. So I hope I'm not boring you all, but these are some things that you need to know. It's the unique categories and things that fall into the unique categories. Right? Good. So I hope that you all understand how we go from the kingdom all the way down to the class, and then you could go into different categories of fish, different types of mammals, and stuff like that. Right? So you have to note these categories and some unique things about each of these types of organisms, right? Sampling, somebody asked me to go through sampling, right? So we have to know how to carry out simple ecological studies, right? To be able to note different things in our ecosystem. And one of the reasons why I love ecology is because is one of the areas that I believe that people can study, but they don't study it because they don't know. Most people do biology because they want to do medicine, because they were taught that biology is to do medicine, right? But when I did my degree, there are people who are ecologists. So they literally study ecology for their living, right? Different things about the environment, right? So ecological studies are very important to understand what is happening with our environment, right? So our habitats, right? So the habitats is the place where the organisms live, right? We have two types. We have the aquatic habitat and we have the terrestrial habitat. So that's on land and in water, right? So you have to note, um, how do you use a quadrat? Did you all do the quadrat experiment? Did you all do the quadrat experiment with the quadrat where you place it and you had to count the amount of organisms within the quadrat? You all did those experiments where you had to count it and you had to go outside and show the quadrat? So you all were supposed to do that experiment, or may have done it, right? So from this experiment, you are able to kind of estimate, because listen, we can't test and count every flowers that exists, right? But if we could make an estimate that if we test a certain area, and out of that certain area, that sample area, we call it a sample area, that you could have this amount of plants, then if you know for this area, you can estimate how this bigger area will be. So that's what they do in ecological sampling. So they sample this area and they say, well, if we found 10 flowers here, then 10 multiplied by, like, say, multiplied by 5 will be 50. In the whole area, we'll find 50. So they use this sample to make an estimate of the whole, right? So you say, no, you did not do the quadrant experiment. Okay, right? So this is basically it. So quadrats can be used, students don't know this, but they are aquatic quadrats and they are quadrats on land, by the way, right? Because when I went to Jamaica, I did an experiment in water. We use water quadrats, right? So quadrats can be used on land or in water as well, right? So the quadrat is a square structure that has inner boxes, right? And most times the quadrat is like a 1 meter by 1 meter long quadrat, right? So most of the times it's a meter square quadrat we use, right? So it's a square. So it's like a meter, 1 meter squared quadrat that we use, and we toss it and we count how much organisms that can be found within the quadrat, right? And how much of the different types that we can find, right? And we use those countings to work out something called diversity, right? So, for example, we could note that this field, it has a diverse amount of different flowers, right? So diversity speaks about the different types of flowers, right? We can also talk about something called density. So diversity speaks about different kinds, while density speaks about the amount. I want you all to write down this formula for me in your book. So they can ask you to work out this in the exam, right? So remember to carry a calculator. So density is equal to the total number of organisms per area, right? So you have to note how many organisms you have, and then you work it out per area, right? So density is the total number of organisms per unit area, right? So that's how you work out the density. So for example, if you count 20 of a particular flowers, right? And you use a 1 meter quadrat, and then you had 20 quadrats, then you will multiply the amount of quadrats by the size of the quadrat. And you will get 20, and then you will say 1 by 20, which you will get 20. So your species density will be 1 per meter squared. Everybody understand? So your density tells you the amount of that organism per area. So write down that formula and learn how to work it out, right? So they can give you a table with different organisms and ask you to work out the density, but they may not even give you the table. Like, they may give you like a grid, and you have to count it. So you have to say, well, the flowers on them, that was like these flowers here, there were 20 of these, but then there were 5 of these, right? So 5 by 1 meter squared by 20 quadrats. So it'll be 5 over 20. Right? But most times you wouldn't find 5, right? You'll find more than that. So you have to work it out. So that would be like a quarter, or 0.25 per meter squared. So that's how you work out density. So density is how much you have in a given area, right? So you work out the density, right? If you're not following, say yes. If you're not following, say no, right? So there are different sampling methods you can use. You can use the quadrat, right? And quadrats are needed or used in, like, for example, in grass fields and flat areas. You won't throw a quadrat upon a tree, right? You will use a quadrat flat on the ground. So you have to note which to use where. So the quadrat is used in flat areas and grasslands. As I said, you could use a quadrat even in the water as well. And quadrats are a form of random sampling, because you don't just go and put down the quadrat in a particular area, you toss it, you just throw it out of your hand, however it drops, you go and you measure. So it's a random kind of sampling, right? And I believe when it's random, it's the better type, because you can make an estimation from a random sample, right? There are other sampling methods that they use, right? They use something called a line transect. You never heard about the line transit or transit? On the line transit, you have a line, right? And along the line, like, they give you a specific amount every meter. You use a quadrat to do a count. So you're doing a count along a line, and you're using this to you're leaving spaces in between, right? So you draw a long line, and along the line, like in a specific measurement, every 10 meters or so, you drop your quadrats and you make your measurements, right? So you call this one a line transect or a belt. Sorry. Right? Good. So along the belt, you will be able to measure different measurements along the belt, right? So you measure and you'll be able to estimate. And sometimes you realize, okay, up on this end, I'm seeing more flowers, I'm seeing more flowers, I'm seeing more flowers, right? And down on this end, you see a different kind of flowers, right? And you realize that the type or the diversity is changing as you go along the belt, right? So I remember doing this. They had us do this where they set us into a mangrove and we pull the belts into the mangrove from the sea coast all the way to the desert land, right? And basically, well, dry land, desert land, and the type of plants change when the water levels change. So you could use a belt to show us the changes that we see in the ecosystem. All right. Okay, so somebody's trying to enter the Zoom. Let me send them the link. Hold on for me. Right? So this is sampling methods. This one is called a belt transit. Draw it in your book. It shows you how structures change as we go along. It shows us how the population sorry, of organisms change, right? And we tend to use quadrats to test and to sample organisms that are not moving. Would you use a quadrat to sample an insect? Why not? And if yes, why? And if no, why not? Would you use a quadrat to sample insects? Would you use a quadrat to sample insects? So I'm waiting for your answer. Would you use this to sample an insect? And if yes, why? And if no, why not? I'm waiting for your response. Would you use this to sample an insect? And I will tell you the answer is no, right? Because an insect will walk out of the quadrat, right? An insect will walk out of the quadrat. So you can't use this to sample organisms that are moving, right? So this is for sessile or organisms that are in place, right? So this one is called the bell transect, sorry, and the line transect is when you just use the line without the quadrat. So you're just sampling along the line itself, right? So this one is called the belt, and this one is the line, right? Okay, the next type of sampling method that can be used is the use of the putter. You ever saw the putter? So the putter is like a bottle, right? And the bottle has two parts. It has like a straw for you to put your mouth on here and you pull in. You pull in with your mouth and you're using the other part on the ground to suck in different types of insects for sample, right? So you're sucking in insects on the ground. And when you pull, right, when you pull in, the insects are coming into the bottle, right? That's how the putter works. And in it, there's a kind of a blockage that will allow the insects not to come into your mouth. Because some people ask me, how come, right? How come, Miss, how come it doesn't go in your mouth, right? There's a blockage that prevents it from going into your mouth, right? Good. So that's how the putter works, right? So that's used on the putter, right? Then bottles, jars, and bottles are used as well. Sometimes after you use your net, right? So sometimes they could have a net, right? They call it a sweep net. So we saw in university they gave us a sweep net, and we used to wave it in the air back and forth and catch butterflies and flying insects. So the net is best to catch things that are flying, right? Like butterflies, right? So using net to catch things that are flying. And we spoke about the quadrant already. We spoke about the line and the belt transit. Then look at this method: mark, release, recapture method, right? This is a nice method. You use those for like things like the shark, things that are moving, organisms that are moving, the shark, agouti, anything that is moving. So how they normally do it is that they collect some organisms and they try to use methods that won't harm them. So you're not gonna cut off, like I say, okay, let me mark the shark, let me cut off the right? Let me cut off the fin of the shark. Right? Let me cut off the fin of the shark. That's how you test it. No, you can mark it without damaging it, right? So you go and you take the shark, you collect some. When you say collect, you mean you mark them, right? So the shark is swimming around. Don't ask me about my shark, eh? I can't draw. Right. This is my shark. I put a tag on the shark, I mark it. Right? So you mark all the possible sharks that you see, right? And you allow it to go back into its nature, you release it, it go back into its nature, right? And then you allow time to pass, maybe sometimes some days, and you go back again, and you recapture, and you count to see the amount that you recapture. So say, for example, you were able to see 10, and you mark all 10, and when you recaptured, you found 20, but out of the 20, 5 was marked. Now the 10 is the original mark number, the 20 is the total that you found, and the 5 represent the amount of markings that you found. Now these 3 bits of measurements, they use them to estimate the population of the shark. All right? Everybody understands that? So they use this calculation to represent the mark, capture, recapture calculation. Everybody understand the method? So you mark the organism, you release it, you catch them back, and you do a count of the amount that you got back that was marked from the first marking that you made and the total amount that you saw the second time around. And there is a calculation that you have to learn, right? So let me give you the calculation. So these are your marks. These are your second sample. So this is sample that you got back the second time around. And this is the amount of marked ones that you recaptured, right? Everybody following me? Please let me know if you're following me, please. Please let me know if you're following. Say yes if you're following. So the formula for that will be, so the estimated number in the population will be equal to the amount of the marks that you had initially multiplied by the second sample and divided by the amount that you recaptured. So this is how you estimate the number in the population, right? You know how much you marked initially. So the first time I caught the sharks, I marked 10, right? Then the second time I caught sharks again, I had 20, right? And the amount of those that I caught that were marked, that had the same mark as before, was 5. So that's what I have to do. So 10 times 20 is 200. And 200 divided by 5 is 40. So I could estimate that the shark population in that area is 40. Anybody lost? Anybody need me to repeat it? Please respond. So if you need me to repeat anything, please respond, and I will. So the number of the estimate of the population. So the M stands for the marked organisms. Initially marked. The S stands for the second sample. So when you go back after the days and you count the amount of sharks again, see a second sample. And the R stands for those that you recaptured that were previously marked. Right? So the recaptured ones that were marked. I've seen this in a past paper, that's why I'm taking the time to explain it. Everybody understand? Say yes or no if you don't understand. So write down this equation here. And this is for the mark recapture method, right? So let me explain it again. They will normally catch the organisms, they mark them, right? They mark them. So I said that they don't mark them with a harsh marking to damage them. Because when they put a little tag on them, then they release them. In some days or so, they go back and they count again how much they saw the second time around. And out of those that they saw, they're going to check for those that have a marking. So I just gave you an example of 10 sharks and 20 they collected on the second go, and then out of the 25 were marked. So you're gonna put those information into your formula, right? So marked by second recapture, then divided by the recapture. So I had 10 by 20 is 200 divided by 5. Good? All right, you understand? So ensure you write down the formula. I've seen this in a past paper before. That's why I took time to go through it. Right? And that's all of the sampling methods. So for the person who wanted to go through sampling methods, I did. All right? All right, let's go on. So the next part, distinguish between the following key terms. So first of all, what is ecology? Ecology is the study of living organisms and the environment, right? Or the ecosystem. So that is what ecology is. Ecology is the study of living organisms and the environment and how they interact, right? That's what ecology is. What is the ecosystem? The ecosystem is made up of all the living organisms, right, that share a particular environment. So that's what the ecosystem is. So I know some texts will tell you the living and the non-living components existing in one area. That's also correct. So they can actually distinguish between the ecosystem and the environment. Now, the ecosystem is not the environment. The ecosystem is the interaction between the living and the non-living components, right? Now, the environment is all of the non-living components that exist. So, for example, the sun, the water, the rocks, these are all a part of the environment, right? So the non-living chemical and physical components is considered to be the environment, right? And then we have the habitat. So what is the habitat? Your habitat is the place where the organism lives, all right? That's the habitat, the place where the organism lives, okay? And you're supposed to know that from primary school or first form. I taught that in third form as well. Niche, right? So the niche is the role of the organism in the ecosystem. So this is a question: is ask them to differentiate between the niche and the habitat. So the niche is where the organism live, and so the habitat, sorry, is where the organism live, and the niche is the role that organism play in the in the ecosystem. And when we say a role, a lion plays the role of a predator, right? A tree may play the role of a producer. It may also play the role of a habitat in terms of where some birds may live. It may play the role of a shelter area to find shelter, right? So an organism will have different responsibilities within the ecosystem, right? So a stone, right, maybe, right, be used, or some kind of an animal may be used to block some organisms below. And there's a kind of crab, right? I don't want to tell you all the wrong thing, but I remember there's a crab that hides in a hole, and then there's an organism that hides over, that sits over it. So that organism now protects that crab in that hole, right? So the niche is the role of the organism in the ecosystem, right? So you have to know how to differentiate these things, right? So we discussed niche and habitat, biotic and abiotic. All right, the next definitions you need to know is population and community. See, a population is a group of one specific organism within a particular ecosystem. So I can have a population of snakes or a population of dogs, right? And then when we have multiple populations living in one area, we call that a community. So you have to know how to define them and compare them. So you'll have like a community made up of populations of dogs, cats, sheep, goats, right? So the population is simply one organism, but one type of organism living in multitude, while the community speaks to different types of organisms in one area. So different populations in one area. Let me know if you're following me, just say yes or no. All right. So far only Amelia is responding to me, right? So let me know if you all are following me. So you have to be able to differentiate between both of them. So let's talk about species and population. So a species, as we said before, is a group of organisms that are genetically similar and they have similar ancestry and they are normally able to interbreed, right? So they are normally able to interbreed, meaning that they are able to make offsprings that are fertile and not just interbreed, but be able to produce fertile offspring. And why we have to say that, right? Now, people very bright, and they feel because they are called scientists that they could do anything. So you ever heard about the joining of a donkey and a zebra? You ever heard about a donkey and a zebra being joined? Anybody? And if yes, what do they call it? So the reason why we have to say two fertile offsprings, produce a fertile offspring, is that it's for a particular reason. So a species is where two organisms can interbreed to produce not just an offspring, but one that is fertile. So the zebra and the donkey has been crossed and they form something called a zedonk, a zebra and a donkey being put together, right? And then they also join the zebra and the horse, right? But one thing that they realized is that these offsprings, though they were produced, they were unfertile, right? If you have a question, please ask me in the comments, right? They were unfertile. So they realized that here what? A species doesn't only produce an offspring, but a species must produce a fertile offspring. All right, it must produce a fertile offspring. Okay, so a species produces a fertile offspring when they are interbred, right? So remember that word fertile. If you're taking notes, write that word fertile big and bold. Underline it, highlight it. All right. So when we have the species now, so that single species, so this is a single species, right? It basically, its offspring is, as we said, fertile when they interbreed, right? Now, the number of this particular species grouped together is called, as we said, a population. So then this one species now forms a population. And we said a community is where different species, populations are present. So we have a population, in a community, we have a population of this, and then we have a population of a different one that looks different, right? So that's the difference there. So communities are made up of populations of different organisms, right? So I hope you all are following me. Hope you all are following me. And this thing seems simple, but guess what? Students still mix them up when they go to the exam. So ensure you learn it. All right? Okay, let's go down. So you all have to know the impact of the abiotic factors on living organisms. All right? So your abiotic factors will be like soil, water, climate, right? Temperature, and those things, right? And how does it affect living organisms, right? So soil, for example, the soil is necessary. Think about a plant, right? In the soil, the plant is allowed to get anchorage by its roots, right? and then the roots of the plant takes up water, right? So the soil is an abiotic factor, and it helps to provide water, which is needed by plants to cool it down for photosynthesis, right? Soil also provides nutrients, and nutrients are used by the plant to do different processes, right? So when we talk about the soil and the abiotic factors, we have to be very careful, right? We have to be very careful, right? Then we have the soil providing air for organisms that live in the soil. So we have to be so clear to look at these factors, right? So we're talking about factors, we're talking about like oxygen, right? So oxygen is in the air, oxygen, um, respiration. We use synthesis. We use nitrogen by using bacteria in terms of legumes, right? So we have to note how different components, they can ask you a question, how is this plant affected by abiotic factors? There are so many answers you could give them. You can say the plant gets sun, right? The plant get light from the sun to carry out photosynthesis, which is absorbed in the leaf of the plant. You can tell them the plant gets nutrients from the soil, which comes in using the water, right? Which comes from the soil, right? You can say a plant gets oxygen from the air, which is used for respiration, right? The plant gets carbon dioxide, which is used for photosynthesis. So this is how abiotic factors help plants. What about animals? Think about humans, right? From the air, we are able to breathe in oxygen for respiration, all right? We normally breathe out carbon dioxide, right? Plants, we are able to get water and food and stuff from the environment, right? So it's very important to answer the questions. If they ask you, how does the abiotic factors affect animals or plants or whatever? That's the kind of answers that you give them, all right? So I hope that I'm not leaving anybody behind. Hope that you all are following, all right? Have you all done the soil experiment? Any soil experiments? You're doing soil experiments? And I have a student that did the third paper for bio, and she said that soil came on the third paper. Right? They had a soil question and they had a leaf question to draw. Right? And something else that they had. So soil came this year for the third paper. All right, let's continue. All right, so let's talk about photosynthesis. Right, so we have to note that photosynthesis is necessary in the production of glucose, right? And plants carry out photosynthesis. So we have to note the role of the producer and the consumer. So remember, producer is an organism that makes food, while the consumer is the organism that feeds on other organisms as food sources, right? So producers make their own food, while consumers feed on other organisms as their source of food, right? So remember that we have something called a food chain and a food web. Now your food chain basically shows you the feeding relationships that exist between organisms. So you have, for example, grass, you may have rabbits, right? You may have snake, and bird, owl. right? So in this food chain, grass is the producer. And remember, the producer is normally in trophic level number 1. So what is the trophic level? You're not taking down definition. So the trophic level is the position of an organism in the food chain, right? So what position is the grass or the producer number 1, right? And then we have the primary consumer. Remember, like the schools that you went to, primary, secondary, tertiary. So the primary consumer would be the primary consumer would be the rabbit, secondary would be the snake, and the owl would be the tertiary. And we also call the owl the top predator in its food chain. This is the top predator, and also we call it the apex predator. So they actually those things in the exam you lost, right? So in the exam you have to know how to construct a basic food chain or food web, and you have to be able to know what each part of the food chain represent. You have to know food chains on land and food chains in water. So I'm just helping you all go through the basic thing that you have to learn, but you now have to go back and say, well, let me go and revise terrestrial food chain. So terrestrial means on land, while aquatic mean in the water. Right? So terrestrial means on land, while aquatic means in water. Okay? So learn basic ones, right? Learn basic food chains and food webs, right? So the food chain, as I said, shows you the relationship between the feeding relationship between organisms. Remember, key thing to remember, energy starts at the producer. So the producer receives energy from the sun, but please do not join the sun in your food chain. I've seen students join the sun in the food chain. The sun is not in the food chain, right? But the sun is the primary source of energy. They have to ask that question as well. What is the primary source of energy? The sun, right? So the sun is the primary source of energy, and the plants receive energy from the sun to produce food via photosynthesis, and then these other organisms can now have energy available. Remember, energy decreases. Learn that. Energy decreases as it goes along the food chain. Okay? So the energy decreases, it goes down as it goes along the food chain, right? It does not increase, or there's no other way to create energy, right? Energy is not created or destroyed, but it's transferred from one form to the next. So when the energy goes along the food chain, it decreases. We might say, but Miss, if you say the energy is transported from one form to the next, what does the energy turn into? It was chemical energy in the form of food. What happens there? Well, the rabbit loses energy due to heat, right? And respiration mainly, and other processes, other metabolic processes, some other bodily processes such as growth and repair and all of these things. So energy is lost as you go across the food chain. You all following me? If you follow me, say yes. I find the numbers are going up and down. If you're following me, say yes. Right? So energy is lost as you go along the food chain. Right? So the owl receives the least amount of energy. The grass has the most amount of energy. Please remember that they love to ask who has the most amount of energy. That is why the owl tend to have multiple food sources, because if the owl gains the least amount of energy, it needs to also eat other things to get enough energy, and that's why it will eat a lot of snakes. And because sometimes snakes are not always available, there are other things the owl may feed on, right? So the owl may feed on the rabbits directly, right? The owl may have another bird that it may feed on, a small bird, right? So the owl may have other food sources, and that's how your food web starts to form, right? Your food web starts to form because other organisms must be introduced to help balance the system, right? So now the arrow should be pointing this way, sorry. Right? So the arrow should be pointing the other way. So the owl now finds other food sources, right? And eventually we form something called a food web. So a food web is an intermixing of food chains. So a food web doesn't only have, it doesn't only always have to have one producer, right? It can have grass, it can have mango, right? You can have a bird eating the mango, but that bird may also be eating some grass. Sorry guys, I put the arrow in the wrong direction. So that bird may also be eating some grass. Then the grass also being fed on by a rabbit. But then you may have a snake. Somebody told me they was having problems with the food web, so I hope you're paying attention. Right? So you may have a snake that is now feeding on the rabbit and the bird. Right? So then you have a web being formed now. And then you may have a hawk that is feeding on the rabbit, the bird, and the snake. So the hawk has multiple food sources because it receives the least amount of energy, right? So this is a food web that you could have, right? In this food web now, in the exam, they could ask you to take this food web and pull out all the possible food chains that you can pull out. Now, I hope you all are paying attention to what I'm showing you, right? Now, in this food web, there are multiple food chains. Can anybody pull out any for me? I'm giving you 2 minutes to pull it out. So pull it out for me. So pull it out for me. So pull out any of the food chains. So you don't have to write no arrows, you could just write the organisms. Let me see if you all are paying attention. So I'm waiting for your answers. I'm waiting for your answers, guys. So I want you all to take the food chain that I placed on the screen and pull out some food chains for me. You all seeing it clearly? Right, good. I see one coming in. So he has grass, right? Grass, bird, snake, hawk. You're correct. So grass, bird, snake, hawk, right? So that's a food chain, right? Out of this food web, right? So just for the sake of time, I'm going to go through the others quickly. So you said grass, bird, snake, hawk. Then we could have mango, bird, snake, hawk, mango, bird, hawk, grass, rabbit, hawk, grass, rabbit, snake, hawk. Now, the reason why I slow down here, because some students just feel they're smart. So they go say, see me, boy, I write down all of that. So what they do, they say mango, bird, snake, and they stop. And the answer will be wrong. Because anytime there are further arrows that you can have to continue and you stop, then your food chain is incomplete. Right? So you go ahead and you continue till the very end when there's no more arrows leaving. Right? So the hawk is the final organism. Now we saw this in a passage for last week where they asked you to pull out a food chain that has three trophic levels. And in this case, we will say mango, bird, hawk. Right? They can ask you for one with four. 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can say mango, bird, snake, hawk. Or you can say grass, rabbit, snake, hawk. Right? So be very specific as to what they're asking you. Make sure you read the questions carefully. All right? In a food web as well, they could ask you something. So we stay in here a little bit. They could ask you if the snake is removed from the food web, how will it affect the web? No, I tell students always circle it. The one that they're talking about, right? So that you could actually see it. So if this snake is removed, what will happen? I'm going to give you all a chance to answer me. If this snake is removed, what will happen to this food web? And the hint here is who is going to lose a food source? Who is going to lose a predator? Right? And how will that affect the food web? I'm giving you all a second to write. And guys, listen, this is a study session, so you all should be interactive. Not just listening to me. This is not a class session. It's a study session, right? So it means that you're free to answer, ask questions, and be interactive, right? You come like Miss Guy, take a whole Saturday evening to sit down and study with you for your exam, right? So you're studying to remember, right? So if the snake is removed, what will happen to this ecosystem? Who's gonna lose? Who's gonna lose their food source, and who's gonna lose a predator? I'm looking in the comments for your answers. I'm waiting for the answer. Don't overthink it. So let me know. You can just write the name of the animal. Who's gonna lose their food source? Amelia fall asleep. I haven't heard anything from, I believe it's Adine. I don't hear anything. I haven't heard some people for the evening. Who's gonna lose their food source? Right, so the hawk will decrease in population as food was removed, right? So the hawk population going to decrease because one of his food source was removed, and the rabbit and the bird. Sorry, some things are blocking my screen. And the rabbit and the bird will lose a predator, and the population may increase due to the decrease of its predator, right? Okay, and another additional point you can add there, they shown, is that the because the snake is lost, right? The hawk will put extra pressure on the other two food sources, right? Because if I don't have no snake no more, I eating plenty more bird and I eating plenty more rabbit. So sometimes, even though we say that the population may increase, it kind of will balance off because the hawk will now put extra pressure on the bird population and the rabbit population because it lost a food source, right? So that's what's going to happen, right? So that's a good answer. That will give you a good mark. So they love to ask you those questions as well. Okay, let me ask you our next question from this food web. They can ask you what organism sits in two different trophic level positions. So they can ask you what organism, right, sits in two different trophic level positions. Right? And the answer could be, you can say which organisms sit in the trophic level position of primary, which organisms sit in the trophic level position of secondary and tertiary consumer. Right? So let's think about that. Which organism sits in two different positions? Which organism sits in the position of secondary and tertiary consumer? So an organism can sit in two different positions. It could sit in the primary, meaning that it could sit in the secondary and tertiary position, meaning that in one food chain, it sits in the secondary position, and in the next food chain, it sits in the tertiary position. So the answer there is the hawk. Right? So in this food chain, the hawk can be in primary and secondary positions based on that food chain. Or based on this food chain, it can become primary, secondary, and tertiary. Right? It could be tertiary, it could be secondary. So they could ask you that question, right? Which organism sits in the secondary and the tertiary position? The answer is the hawk. In one food chain, it is a primary. In another food chain, it is secondary. Right? What other question you have to ask about food chain? I think that's a basic thing. Pulling out food chains from food webs, they can ask you about organisms being removed and organisms sitting in different positions. They can also ask you to pull out any herbivore from any food chain, which would be the rabbit, the bird. They could ask you to pull out a carnivore, which would be the snake or the hawk, right? So that's basically what they could ask you in the exam for food chains and food webs. Let's move on. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop it, guys. Right? Also, you have to learn how to draw pyramids. You all know how to draw the three different pyramids? Do you all know the three different pyramids that you have to know how to draw? There are three main pyramids that you should know how to draw. The pyramid of energy, the pyramid of numbers, and the pyramid of biomass. Right? So there are three pyramids that you're supposed to know how to draw. The pyramid of energy, the pyramid of numbers, and the pyramid of biomass. You never heard of those three pyramids before? Hello? Let me know. Say yes, no. So the pyramid of energy tells you the amount of energy at each trophic level. So for example, we have a trophic level of grass, rabbit, and snake. Hope you all are taking notes, and this video remains on YouTube, so you all can rewatch it before the exam. Right? So grass, rabbit, snake. Right? So in the pyramid of energy, the grass goes to the bottom, because it is the producer. Do not put the sun in the food, in the pyramid, right? So if you don't put the sun at the bottom there, do not put the sun in the pyramid, right? So you put it, and you could write the names on the inside, or you can write it on the outside, right? So you can write it on the inside, you can write it on the outside, right? So this is the pyramid of energy. You have to put the organism as well as the amount of energy at each level. Now, we said that energy is lost as we go along the food web, the food chain, sorry, right? So energy, remember that. I hope you all taking a notes, you know. Energy is lost as you go along the chain, right? So as you go along the chain, energy is lost. So you expect that as you go up the pyramid, it has less and less energy. Now, scientists proved that 10% of the energy is lost at each level, right? Only 10% is passed on. So let's create some sample numbers here. So we can say the energy, the unit for energy, by the way, is joules, Joules, right? That's the basic units. And sometimes you may see kJ, which means kilojoules, right? In some cases, you may also see things like calories. All of those are energy units, right? So if you're using joules, we can say 100,000 joules, right? If we say it only 10% is passing along, 10% of 100,000 is 10,000. So 10,000 joules. And I'm allowing you all to answer me. What is 10% of 10,000? What is 10% of 10,000? In the meantime, I'm going to go across and write my other pyramid. I'm waiting for you all to answer me. What is 10% of 10,000? I'm waiting for the answer. 10% of 10,000. I'm drawing a new food chain because I want to show you all a specific point. Thank you so much, Isaac. So 1,000, right? So we have 1,000 joules there, right? So whenever you join a pyramid of energy, right, you can also put sample estimates, proof to them that you know that is 10% that is passing along, right? So that's a good way to prove to them that you know that's only 10% that is passing along. You can draw that there, right? And this is a pyramid of energy. And some persons on this side, they will put in producer, primary, consumer, and secondary consumer. So they put the trophic level on this side. Please write it out. I'm just writing it like shortcut because I don't have space. Right? So primary consumer, secondary consumer, producer. Right? They put the trophic levels on the side and you get a full mark. I've seen these come for all 8 marks. Don't lose those marks, please. Make sure you draw a pyramid with all of the information. Right? Let's look at the pyramid of numbers. We draw a new food chain across here. 3 birds, snake. Now, pyramid of numbers, so we're talking about the number pyramid, tells you the amount, right? Numbers, the amount of the different organisms at each level, right? So the number at each level. Now, people get tapped with this because they look at the size of the organism. Remember, number has nothing to do with size. So if it's one tree, it's one tree. If it's 100 birds, it's 100 birds, and if it's 20 snakes, it's 20 snakes. So when you're drawing a pyramid now, you're going to draw a very thin line that represents one. And then you're going to draw a bigger line that represents 100 birds. And you're going to draw a bigger one than the tree, but smaller than the bird for the snake. Right? So you're going to put one tree. Right? 100 birds and 20 snakes. Everybody following me? Everybody following? Let me know. So the pyramid of numbers have nothing to do with the size of the organism, but just the amounts. If you're following me, let me know. And the last one is the pyramid of biomass. So this one, we're going to use the same food chain. We're going to use the same food chain that we use for the numbers for the biomass, right? And this one is the most accurate to make descriptions based on the entire population because it takes into consideration the size of the organism and the amount of the different organisms that are at each level. So, for example, the tree, though it be one tree, they're going to multiply the number, multiply by the mass of the tree, right? So they may be able to say, okay, that tree weighs 200 kilo. That tree weighs 200 kilograms, they're saying, right? And it's 5 of them. So you put in 200 by 5. And they also take into consideration the area, right? So the unit is normally mass per area it occupies, right? So the biomass unit is normally a mass per area as the unit. So they take into consideration the area as well, right? And then the other one is birds. So birds are very light. So say you have 1,000 birds. But they must see 1,000 birds that weigh 0.05 kilograms. Just using that as an example, it'll be less than that. And they will work that out to find the biomass over the particular amount of area that they're measuring it by. And they also do the same thing for the snake. So they say 20 snakes, and each snake weigh 0.005 kilograms as well, right? And they divide it by total area of space, and that's how they work out the biomass. Okay? So you have these pyramids that you have to learn. Please review them if you don't know them. Pyramids of numbers, pyramids of energy, and pyramids of biomass. So we just covered this objective, right? Okay? And I want you to also go and review food chains for aquatic environments and food chains for terrestrial environments. Because sometimes they may give you the organisms' names and stuff, but other times they'll let you find it for yourself. They allow you to figure it out. And you have to know, okay, aquatic animals are like algae and phytoplanktons and zooplanktons as producers, and then you have your consumers that will be like your small fish, and you can give them specific names, your eel, right? Then you have the bigger stuff, and you have your shark and your whale, and those normally being the top tier, consumers, or remember, birds also join in the aquatic food chains. You might see a pelican or some kind of bird that goes and feeds in the ocean, right? So I hope nobody's being left behind, but we're moving on to the next objective. So I'm not sure how much you're gonna finish, but I want to end off at 8 because that will make it 3 hours we have been going for. But let's see how much we could cover in the next half an hour. So I hope that I'm helping you all in your revision, and you all are free to ask me any questions that you want to ask based on this section, and I'll try my best to give you my best answer, right? So we went through this already: carnivores, herbivores, omnivores, right? So remember, herbivores are plant eating only. Carnivores are flesh eating, so animal eating only. And then we have the omnivores that eat both animals and plants, right? So you have to know examples of each category, right? Then we spoke about habitat, the place where the organism lives. Also, we talk about predator-prey relationship. So a predator-prey relationship speaks to, and that's something that they could also ask you in the food web. So the predators are those that do the feeding, right? But the prey is what is being fed on. So for example, you may have a gazelle and you may have a lion, right? So the lion is the predator and the gazelle is the prey. I feel like I'm spelling that gazelle wrong. Do you know what I'm talking about? Right? So the prey is what is being fed on, and the predator is doing the feeding. So that's a predator-prey relationship. And what they realize is that if there's a graph that they can bring with this, and the graph basically shows you that whenever the prey level go down, like so say for example, this is the graph, right? And it has two lines. So this is the predator line, okay, right? So what they realize is that whenever, like this is the prey line, right? Whenever the predator increases and the prey go down, eventually the predator will go down because now their food source is going down. So they realize that when the predator increase, the prey line tends to decrease, and it happens like one after the other. And whenever the prey starts back to increase, the predator, so when the prey starts back to increase, the predator now starts to increase again because it's basically following its food source. So there's a graph that they can bring like this. Please ensure that you know that graph. If you're following me, just say yes. If you have any questions, let me know, right? But predator-prey relationships can be beneficial, right? And it can be beneficial because we can use it for something called biological control, right? So biological control basically speaks about using these relationships, these feed relationships, the predator-prey relationship, to control the population of a specific organism. So, for example, you may have a particular beetle that is eating your crop, right? And instead of using chemical pesticides, you could go ahead and take an organism that feeds on that beetle, right? So say for example, the dragonfly feeds on that right? So you have the dragonfly. So the dragonfly feeds on that specific beetle. Instead of going and spraying the crops with a whole set of pesticides, you can now release some of those dragonflies to carry down the beetle population. Right? So that's what we call biological control. And this is also a way they ask you how to conserve in terms of pollution. This is another way that you can reduce pollution. Instead of using chemicals, you can use other pest control methods such as biological control. The only drawback about biological control is that sometimes the organism that you introduce to control the other organisms, you must ensure that it's not an invasive species. You must ensure that there is also something else that comes and feeds on that organism that you're using as control, because then if there is nothing to feed on the dragonfly, guess what will happen? The dragonfly population will go out of control, right? Because then it has out of food and the population will go out of control, and that's another problem it is starting, right? So your predator using for your biological control, it must also have something that feeds on it. If you're not following me, say yes, miss, we're bringing it together soon, right? We're bringing it together soon, right? So we already discussed this. We already discussed constructing food webs, all right? Remember your trophic levels, primary. So we have the producer, then we have the primary, secondary, and tertiary. Remember, it's all the schools that you went to. You went to primary school, you went to secondary school, and then very soon you'll be going to, some of you will be going off to tertiary education after you do sixth form, right? So remember it like that, right? Do not leave out any. And remember, an organism may be considered to be, like, say, the primary consumer, but it also may be a herbivore. So an organism can have different names based on which classification that you're doing, right? So please, please, please go over those things, go over those things, go over those things. Right? We discussed already the role of the decomposer, but I'll just mention it again. Decomposers help with the recycling of nutrients. So nutrients, if you have if you have basically a tree, within this tree you have locked up carbon, you have locked up nitrogen, you have locked up different nutrients locked up in the tree, right? Now when the tree dies or a branch falls off, right? In that branch, there's built up carbon, there's built up nitrogen, there's built up different components, right? When it decomposes now feeds on and breaks down this dead and decaying tree, you release the carbon, you release the nitrogen out of it, right? And it can now become nutrients that can be used again, right? So decomposers are needed for the recycling of nutrients in our ecosystem. And imagine if, like, for example, when your neighbor dog died years ago, all right, and there was no decomposer to break down that dead dog. You know how much days it would have taken to ever break down? The decomposers are necessary, right, to help speed up the decomposition, the breaking down process of these dead organisms, right? So we see mold on bread. That's a typical example, right? So remember, mold is a fungus. So you have a bread there, it lives in the fridge, it lives on the counter for a very long time, then you see green things coming up on it, right? And it is a fungus, right? So they ask you what type of organisms are usually decomposers, fungi, and bacteria. Okay? Fungi and bacteria. These are usually your decomposers. Good? Everybody clear on that? Hope you all ain't sleeping on me, you know. Answer me if you all understanding. Answer me, answer me, answer me. So they can ask you to give them examples of decomposers and explain why they are important, right? So remember to explain things based on the amount of marks. If they give you this for 2 marks, you could just tell them that decomposers are organisms that are used to break down dead and decaying matter to release their constituent nutrients or the nutrients that are within them, right? And then you could tell them that decomposition is necessary because we don't want to have all nutrients locked up where they can't be used in further processes, right? And if it's a 5 mark question, you can tell them examples of decomposers are fungi and bacteria. We see decomposition in our homes, simply, on our bread, right? It's our mold and stuff like that. So make up your lines. Don't just write one line and think you're a miss. I mash up the exam and that's how the exam mash you up. Right? Use all of the lines that you're given. Right? Use the lines that you're given to answer. Okay? Right, let's talk about special relationships. We mentioned it before. We're just going to mention it again quickly. So our special relationships are like our mutualism, commensalism, and our parasitism. Right? So mutualism speaks about your relationship. I told persons, think about friendships. Like you have right now, some of you have some good friends that you're studying with for exam, right? They helping you, you helping them, right? That's mutualism, right? And then you have the commensalism friendships, right? It's where one of you are benefiting, so one of them coming by you and you giving them your past paper answers, but they may have no past paper answers. So in that case, you are not being harmed, but you're not even benefiting. They are alone benefiting. So when one party alone benefiting in a relationship, then that's commensalism. And parasitism is when one benefits and the other one is harmed, right? So that's parasitism. So you have to know examples of each of them. So parasitism, the dog and the tick, right? Or even a person, a human and a virus. So coronavirus and a human, right? So a parasite can be on your inside, not just on the outside, right? And some, if not stopped, a parasite will kill its host. Yeah. Then we have the commensalism, such as the epiphyte on the tree. So I'm not sure if you ever saw a tree, right? You have a tree, and up in its branches, you saw this kind of pineapple looking thing just there, hanging up there, but not even like in the tree, just hanging on the branch, right? That's an epiphyte, that type of a tree type. And your epiphytes, they do not disadvantage the tree in any way because they're not taking any nutrients from the tree. They carry out their own photosynthesis, they make their own food, and they actually have a structure. They kind of like shape like a bowl. So when rainfall, they have water catchment. So they don't even get water from the tree, they catch their own water, right? Or even from the night dew, they catch dew as water source as well, right? But how does it benefit? Because it is up in the tree, it's closer to the sun, right? So the epiphyte is closer to the sun, but it's up in the tree, so it has an advantage. So that's the benefit. Closer proximity to the sun, and it also gets a home from the tree, right? So that's that relationship there is an example of commensalism. So the tree doesn't benefit or it isn't harmed, right? And the last one is mutualism, where both of the organisms benefit. So humans, we tend supposed to be in a mutualistic relationship with each other where we both benefit, right? So Miss Guy come on to this session and put out all of her energy, and your benefit is for you to go in the exam and do well, right? And my benefit is knowing that I would have contributed to your success, right? So at the end of the day, both organisms supposed to benefit. But you know what? In human relationships now, we see where people acting like parasites. They're latching on to people until the people have no life, right? But if they ask you about a beneficial relationship or a mutualistic one, you could tell them about the um coral and the fish that feeds on the coral. The fish cleans the coral, and the fish also gets food and shelter from the coral, right? Or as we have here, the roots of legumes. Legumes are like our peas and our beans and our nuts. These roots have something called nodules in the roots that are able to hold bacteria. And these bacteria provides nitrogen, provides nitrogen nutrients to the soil, to the legume, and the leguminous plant gives the bacteria a home and also food supply. So both of them are benefiting. So you could learn these examples or any other example that you know, right? We discussed this already, energy flow in our food web. We discussed that already. So guys, we almost finished. We discussed that already, how energy flows in food web, right? It starts at the producer and it goes to the consumers. It does not go back the opposite direction. But the energy is transformed from one form of energy to the next. So it started off as light energy, right? They can ask you that question: how does energy, what forms does energy take, right? You could say that in the sun, from the sun, it was first light energy, and then light energy was transported into chemical energy in terms of food, and then this chemical energy is also converted to heat energy, yeah, because energy is lost in our bodies due to heat in respiration, right? Through respiration and through heat, right? So they can ask you something like that, okay? And you have to explain your carbon cycle and your nitrogen cycle, right? So take a note of that. Watch a video or two on YouTube, carbon, nitrogen, and you can even look at your water cycle as well. So take a note of that carbon, nitrogen, water cycle. Go through those, right? Okay, let's do this last bit here and we'll sign off because we already kind of went through everything. The other persons came in late, so I'm just finishing off, right? So discuss the importance of and the difficulties encountered in recycling materials. So you have to learn what is recycling, what is reducing, and what is reusing. So you have to learn those three definitions, right? So recycling is when you take um, a particular material and you use it to create something new, right? With reusing, you taking the same material and use it again, right? So for example, your J cloth, you wouldn't just throw it away, wash it and use it again. And reducing means that you're using less material, right? So you have to be able to discuss this. They could bring like a scenario and ask you to create a recycling plan, a reduction plan. So using less paper, okay, using technology, using computers and phones, right? You're using so instead of throwing away your newspaper, you use it now to create maths or a project or something, right? And then they actually recycle newspapers. They actually take the paper put it back into water and they change it back into a kind of slurry and they make the papers over. So they actually recycle paper, right? So you have to learn how these three methods operate, and you have to look at biodegradable and non-biodegradable materials. So biodegradable materials are those that break down, right? They degrade, they break down. So it'll just stay there. So if I throw a mango seed, it will break down over time. But if I throw a piece of steel, that's still gonna remain for years and it will never break down. Right? They call steel and those metals, non-biodegradable. Right? Good. So you have to learn the difference, how they are collected, transported, stored, right? Consider all of those things. Right? I know you all are in and out because you all, it takes capacity to take in information. So I know persons will rewatch I trust that you are going to rewatch. So I'm just finishing off here. In the last couple objectives, we don't have much more to go. Right? So let's talk about humans and the impact on natural resources. So you have to talk about how we use resources, whether it be electricity, right? How we use our minerals, our gold, our nutrients, minerals that we find, how people use it, how we care for our forests, are we cutting down our trees? They can ask you, how do you stop that? They could give you a scenario and say, Mr. John and his family decided to cut down all of the trees on their property, explain to them why this is a good reason, a bad reason, using reasoning. You could tell them well, cutting down trees, you could sell the lumber for money, and lumber is very expensive. But the disadvantage of cutting down trees, right? So remember, trees carry out photosynthesis, right? And your trees that carry out photosynthesis, they take in carbon dioxide, right? I want you to pay attention to this, please. So carbon dioxide is taken in by our trees, and carbon dioxide is a lot of carbon dioxide, and carbon is stored in our trees. Now, carbon, if too much of carbon build up in the atmosphere, you're going to form something called a carbon blanket, right? Hope you all are listening. Now, this carbon blanket can become dangerous. Now, in our atmosphere, light rays from the sun comes in and it bounces back out naturally, in and out, right? But when you have this big, thick blanket, what happens is that you trap heat in the atmosphere. When the carbon is trying to go back out, it cannot go back out, right? And because of that, we experience what we see now, that thing called the greenhouse effect, because gases are trapped inside and we are experiencing global warming, right? So cutting down trees removes the carbon, the opportunity for excessive carbon not to be in the atmosphere. And as a result, too much carbon results in a carbon blanket being formed. The forming of the carbon blanket means that heat is trapped in the earth, right? Making us experience the greenhouse effect. And then we realize that our globe is warming, right? So cutting down trees is actually leading to global warming. So they can ask you, what can you do? Plant more trees, right? Educate your population, right? So education is always a good method. Host seminars and stuff, and also set laws in place, and not just set the laws because our countries have laws, but we don't follow the laws, right? So implement the laws that we were given, right? Implement the laws that we were given. Charge people when you see them cutting down trees. Charge them thousands of dollars. They're gonna stop, right? And another thing is that we need to look for alternative methods of energy, right? So we can't just depend. So Trinidad and Tobago for decades have been depending on our oil and gas. But we just cannot depend on our oil and gas anymore. We have to look into having other alternative sources of energy, right? So tell me in the comments quickly and make sure you all are not sleeping on me. Tell me different forms of alternative energy that you know. Different forms of alternative energies that you know. Let me know. Making sure you're not sleeping on me. We almost finished. So different forms of alternative energy. I'm waiting for you all. So we have to find other sources of energy to use, right? Because our oil and gas is depleting. So we have to find other sources of energy. So I feel everybody's sleeping, right? So we have wind, we have solar energy, right? We have wind, we have solar energy, right? We can have another source, hydro energy, where we have water that actually falls and turn turbines. And there are other sources of energy that we can use, right? Another problem that we have is overfishing, right? So sometimes we destroy our mangrove areas, and our mangroves are necessary, especially on the coastline, because they are in the mangroves is where the fish goes and lays eggs, right? That gives us the new generation of fishes, right? But when you go and destroy mangroves, you are destroying your fish breeding sites, right? You are destroying your fish breeding site. So as a result, you are destroying your fish population. So we have to be so careful that we do not destroy our habitat like that. So mangrove conservation is a good thing to revise, right? Because it is very good to revise, right? And I think we are coming to the end, and we spoke about human impacts on the environment. So pollution, and you all know pollution, right? So know what is a pollutant versus what is pollution. So pollutants are the chemicals that we use, or the noise is pollution as well. So the pollutant is a substance that adds adverse effects to our environment, while the pollution is the process of introducing the pollutant to the environment, right? So we have to ensure that we know the difference. What is pollution? What is a pollutant? Right? You have to know the difference, and note that you have different types of pollution. We have chemical pollution through fertilizers, right? We have exhaust, when factories give off exhaust. We have air pollution going on, right? When we dispose of garbage in the waterways, in this drain, and you say, I could throw that there, people go clean it, right? You are adding to pollution, and you're adding to all the bad things, right? So that's adding solid waste, right? So we have to ensure we are disposing of garbage properly, right? By using separating our garbage into different categories. So we have plastic bottles, glass for recycling purposes, right? We throw garbage in a way that it can be stored at and carried to our designated landfills and storage areas. Don't just straight in the drain, right? Because we had a situation where the turtles, the turtles, um, the turtles misplaced plastic bottles for jellyfish already, and destroy their digestive system, right? So all of these things are detriments, right? Sometimes the chemicals that seep into waterways can cause poisoning, right, to population, to people, right? Because the water become contaminated. So many things you could consider. Consider water pollution, land pollution, air pollution, and then look into chemical pollution, solid waste pollution, and even noise pollution. So too much noise acts as pollution as well, and even energy pollution, right? So sound, noise is sound, right? So that's sound energy. So energy pollution is a serious thing as well. All right, good. So ensure that we don't pollute our waterways, and you have to learn how it affects us in small island states, the pollution, and discuss how the destruction of your wetlands can affect the health of the ecosystem. How it can affect how our ecosystem look, right? So aesthetic, the look, right? So I took my bio classes, two of them, I took them to the reef to check on pollution, um not in the reef, sorry, to the mangrove. And they saw how much bottles and pollutants that were in the mangroves along Bonaccord area in Tobago, for those that are from Tobago, right? So we see where it's damaging the aesthetic, the look. Imagine you going to see a nice natural area and you see also a plastic bottle and KFC box and stuff like that. That doesn't look good aesthetically, right? So it messes up your aesthetics, right? And also economy, right? Because when you destroy the reef, right? When the chemicals go and destroy our reef, when the tourists come, they ain't see no reef, they will stop come because people, you go on TikTok and say, don't go to Tobago because the reefs are dying or the reefs are damaged, right? They won't come. So we have to ensure we're taking care of our marine life because it affects our economy as well, right? And also, when you say economy, we know that the government will pay money to fix different parts of the coral reefs and stuff if they're damaged. But it's also costing the government money right now to build artificial reefs. So yes, that's a thing. They build artificial reefs to take out they build artificial reefs to take out take the pressure off the real reef and let the fish go into the artificial one while the real one go through its time of redeveloping, right? So that's some strategies that you can use, right? And really, this is our last objective that we're going to look at, right? You all, I know you're not even here with me right now. How about you all gone, right? Okay, so it's the last three objectives we have. All right, the last three objectives. I believe we discussed it, right? So climate change. You see this? You see climate change, guys? I don't know why I'm telling you all. Make sure you revise climate change to this exam, right? So discuss how greenhouse gases affect, or as I explained to you all, the trapping of the gases in the atmosphere, right? Causes heat to trap in the earth. It causes the carbon blanket, sorry, to form and heat to trap in the earth. As a result of that, we have the rise in temperature, as we said. We have the rise in sea levels, right? Contamination causes ocean acidification, especially when too much carbon dissolves in the ocean, right? So look into that, look into that, look into that, right? Make sure you revise that global warming, right? And climate change. And the last two objectives, and we are finished. You all need to consider means to conserve and to restore our environment and our ecosystem. All right. So ensure that you practice, 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 practice. You ensure that you practice these type of questions, these type of suggestive questions when you have to explain something like create a strategy, right? So ensure that you talk about how you can conserve and how you can preserve and reserve your environment, right? So conservation speaks about protecting something before it is damaged, right? So there are ways of conservation, right? We have particular reserve areas that have been set up to conserve our environment. So, for example, our rainforest is a reserve, right? So you're not supposed to go into a rainforest and be hunting certain animals and stuff because it's supposed to be a safe place for them that the populations will continue to live and thrive. Right? But we know how our people are, we're still going into those areas, but we're not supposed to, right? And then we consider, not cutting down our trees as we said before, right? We consider using natural materials in agriculture, for example, manure instead of the chemical fertilizers and chemical fertilizers, and we try to use natural fertilizers, pesticides, biological control, as we mentioned before. All of these things we can use instead of chemicals, right? And we make sure it actually create a strategy. Always tell them to educate the population, hold seminars and trainings to educate the population as it pertains to conservation, right? Also set up monitoring strategies through laws to monitor people from cutting down trees and littering and stuff, charge them penalties when they do it. It's going to keep them away from doing it, right? So these are some tips. And the last thing, discuss factors that affect the growth of the population. So we're going to talk about food and space. So obviously, if you don't have enough food and space, so that's right now people say that if the world population increased by another billion, they won't have food and space. I don't agree because right now we still have a lot of food and space. It's just that food is being used as a weapon. So some people have food and some people don't, right? But I believe that we have enough land space that we can plant food, right? Um, Diseases. So when diseases increase in the population size decrease, as we saw with COVID, over how much million persons died as a result of COVID, right? You have to be careful with that. The effect of diseases, pests. So pests will affect your plants, causing them to die. Introduction of invasive species. So invasive species are those that don't have a predator over them and you can die, right? As a result of that. And also natural disasters. We don't plan for natural disasters. They happen and sometimes they take lives, right? But most times this type of a question comes as a strategy. Also, they give you as a graph to analyze data, right? So please look out for it. So guys, we have come to the end of our study session. And I hope that at some point, something that you didn't know come back to your memory, something that you need to go and revise. It hits you that you need to revise it a little more. I recommend strongly that you go ahead to read your study guide, as I said before, and to practice questions. So after we would have done this today, my wise advice to you to make sure that you would have captured something from today is to go and practice Section A type questions tomorrow or so. You have time, right? So let me just show you all this specimen paper to show you potential questions that will come based on the section that you all are we just discussed. This question, population size. That's a section A question. Right? Talking about the size of the population. Talking about state 2 physical, biotic, and abiotic factors that can affect things living in a pond. So we said abiotic is the non-living factors, such as the in a pond will be like water, right? And also the gases, the oxygen and stuff is the non-living things. So in the water, they will get carbon dioxide for photosynthesis, and the water is where the organisms will live, right? They gave them questions on trophic levels and food chains, right? So they gave them a table, right? They gave them a table and they asked them to create, can you all I feel like you're sleeping, you know. But who's up? Can you all look at this food web, and tell me if you would have been able to do this question? So they gave you a table and they told you what is the organism and the food eaten. So what they are eating, right? And it is a food web. So all you have to do is do it step by step. So you just tell them the organism and what is being eaten, right? So you have like waterweed, and you will have what is eating the waterweed, right? So waterweed is a producer, makes his own food, and you just do it from there, right? So this is a food web question. So it's a very easy question. You just have to write what is, remember to write the right arrows, right? So I'm gonna screenshot this question. Anybody following me on Instagram? If you follow me on Instagram, I'm gonna screenshot the question. I'm gonna drop it there, right? So feel free to go ahead and to construct the food web and tell me. You could send me a picture of your answer now. So I'm gonna drop it on the Instagram page. Right? And I want you all to see this question. You all seen this question? Everybody seen this question? Hello. So this question is basically what we discussed earlier. So I hope you all wrote down the formula, right? So we discussed this one, where we discussed density. So density, diversity and density. So the amount of organisms um in the population. So the total amount of organisms and how much of that particular organism you find in the food in that trophic, in that quadrant, right? So this is a very similar question to what we looked at today. I'm going to drop this one as well. And they ask you to do calculations for the species density. Yes, I explained that today. So if you missed it, you could go back. If you missed that particular question, you can go back. Right? But I explained how to do that question today. And they gave you an area, right? They gave you an area and they ask you to name the apparatus that you need to do the sampling. So let's say the distribution of the different plants and animal species changes along the water edge to the highway. Name 2 additional pieces of apparatus students will use to investigate the change in distribution of plants and animal species, right? So they maybe have already used they use a quadrat. You could also use you may use like a net if you want to catch flying animals, and you can use traps. You could use the putter to catch insects, right? So all of those things that you could talk about, right? So we went through these things, and you should have been able to answer this question based on what we discussed today. All right, guys, so this is the end of our session. I hope that it was beneficial to you all. I took the time to go through the entire section with you. A lot of information, but I hope that you all have been well prepped for A, and you make sure now to go and maximize it and make the best of it. All right, so guys, have a good night and all the best. I don't think I will do section B review because there's a lot, but if I have time, I may break it up into parts. If I have time, that's it. That's the condition. If I have time, right? But all the best in your studying. And we meet again for you all who are my students. See you all at class. And for those that are part of the past paper session, the revision session. See you at that next week, Saturday. All right. So all the best, guys. See you all. All right. So have a good night. And thank you for staying all the way through. I know persons will have come and go, but I know some of you stayed all the way through. So have a blessed night, everyone, and all the best. If you need the biology study guide, feel free to message me on Instagram on Scholars Immaculate Academy. Send me an email at scholarsacademy868@gmail.com. scholarsacademy868@gmail.com. If you don't have the study guide, you can also message me on 868-750-4796. That's 868-750-4796. If you need a study guide, feel free to message me, all right? So all the best, guys, and I will see you next time.